Foyt, Indy, 1967.
And there's an accident on the front straightaway. There's 2, 3, 4 cars. Where's Foyt? I don't know whether he can get through or not. Hitting the wall. Bouncing back across the straightaway. Foyt's only got a couple hundred yards to go. But there he is. He's got to get through. A.J. Foyt will win the Indianapolis 500.
Emerson Fittipaldi, youngest man ever to win the coveted title of World Champion Racing Driver. You see him here in his exotic Lotus, whipping through the streets of Monte Carlo during the Monaco Grand Prix. Richard Petty, humming down the back straight up the Daytona International Motor Speedway on the final lap of the 1973 Daytona 500. 4 times he's won the race. 4 times Richard Petty has won the NASCAR Grand National Stock Car Championship. First man ever to win $1 million in stock car racing. Mark Donohue, here winning Indy 500, 1972. Called by many the most versatile racing driver in the game today. Today, you'll see these 4 champion racing drivers plus 8 other champions competing in the most unique automobile racing series ever. 12 champions driving identical automobiles. This hot Porsche Carrera. Every effort made to ensure that each driver will have comparable racing machines made especially for the World Series of Automobile Racing. The International Race of Champions. Premiering today on ABC's Wide World of Sports.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All righty, race fans, sports fans, how are you? My name is Tim Hanlon, and it's Good Seats Still Available, the curious little podcast that each and every week is devoted to, despite all the odds, what used to be in professional sports. Thank you for finding us once again. We are honored to have you in our presence. Thank you for downloading us and streaming us or whatever you're doing. You're putting us in your earbuds and ingesting this week's episode with our guest this week, Matt Stone, who is the former managing editor and chief cook and bottle washer at Motor Trend magazine, longtime automotive journalist and photographer. As we talk about, as hinted in pre-clip fashion, IROC, the International Race of Champions. Yes, you must remember this. This is sort of the original sort of version of what is constantly being reinvented and reconstituted and brought back currently in the form right now of Superstar Racing Experience, SRX. You maybe have been watching over the last couple of weeks and a few more weeks to come on CBS television on Saturday nights. Tony Stewart and Ray Evernham and friends have put together another attempt from this concept that IROC pioneered back in the 1970s around what if you put some of the top drivers around the world from multiple racing disciplines into theoretically and hopefully conceivably the same type of car, the same setup with no differentiations. Everybody's got the same chassis, the same body, the same pluses and minuses with the operation, and put them into various racing situations and see just who is the best at their craft, the craft. If you take performance and car mechanics and all that sort of gadgetry, wizardry out of it, and truly make it an even keel, an even field of machine, and get to the racing driver skill set and see who might win. I am frankly fascinated by it. I'm not a huge fan of the short track thing, but I love the idea of having the same kind of car and having multiple racers from different disciplines kind of go at it and see just who might be indeed better than others. And I've actually gotten hooked on the whole thing. It's only a 2-hour presentation on Saturday nights, and it's done live. I think it's a great throwback to sort of the short track culture, which is very well ingrained in the United States sports history and certainly in automotive history. But it does harken back, and it's interesting. To every week, there is not at least one mention of the old International Race of Champions format. And I think Tony Stewart has a lot to do with that since he raced in it too. But we're going to kind of dig really deep into the true early year and pre-year of the first ever IROC series, what is now known as IROC 1, that was run over the course of 4 races in 3 days in the latter part of 1973 and the early part of 1974. And Matt Stone is just issued just an absolutely gorgeous new book that I highly encourage everybody to get. Even if you're not a racing fan, you're going to find the visual imagery and the memorabilia that's photographed in this, as well as the story, of course. The book is called The IROC Porsches, the International Race of Champions, Porsche's 911 RSR, and the men who raced them. And Matt has crafted a great story here, and it's got a couple of different layers. Number one is the actual idea of the IROC series, which at the time was quite stunning in its audacity, as well as its imagination. Now, we kind of scratched the surface of the original ideation of that with our pal Dave Lockton back in episode 173 last year. He, a longtime exec at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and the founding and longtime running head of the Ontario Speedway. And Dave was, I think with a bunch of other folks, kind of ideating this IROC concept in sort of very early forms. But as we get into our conversation with Matt Stone this week, we're going to get into the granulars of the people truly who kind of took the idea and sort of put it into real motion, putting it into actuality. And people like Roger Penske are very much part of that, and a few others, of course. And we get into kind of not only just the ideation of the series itself, but also we get into the cars, right? So there's a whole reason why, at least in the first series, that first season, that the Porsche 911 was decided on as being the automobile to race. And as most race fans will sort of appreciate, and this is a completely new concept to me, these drivers from various disciplines were all put in these gorgeous looking, I guess, M&M colors is sort of maybe the best way to describe them. All kinds of just gorgeous colors that, were not only raced during these 4 races, and again, the brainchild by Les Richter, Roger Penske, and Mike Phelps, pretty much the triumvirate of, this series, putting it all together. It was decided that this car would be probably the best way to judge one's true racing performance, regardless of discipline. And it's a collector's item. All of these cars, there were 12 drivers, but 16 cars created all together, specifically for this series. And all of them, the gorgeous colors and the hues of yellows and greens and blues and reds and blacks, and it's just absolutely stunning. They are absolutely collector's items, and all of them still exist. And per Matt's conversation, we get into, and a little off the air as well, they're going for a good $2 million a clip, including Jerry Seinfeld owned one. I think he owned the yellow one, and now, of course, Matt's going to be yelling into his device as to which car that was, who drove that one. But Seinfeld, as an auto enthusiast, I believe sold that yellow car for about $2.4 million a couple of years back. It just shows you how revered these original IROC Porsches from the 1973-74 original season, the only season, the first and only season that Porsche 911s were used. As we, the history of IROC as it sort of played out over the years and a couple of decades afterwards, it became kind of more of a stock car-ish kind of bent to it over time. But make no mistake, this first season of IROC, the International Race of Champions, was essentially a battle of the stars racing the Porsche Carrera RSR 9/11. And let's, as we sort of get into this conversation, the race drivers were from various points of racing. Mark Donohue and Peter Revson and George Fulmer, who is the writes the intro to this book by Matt Stone, all with various levels of success in the Can-Am series. Peter Revson, also a part of the Formula One series at the time, along with Emerson Fittipaldi and Dennis Holm. So that discipline, Formula One, was represented in this. You had what was then known as the USAC Champ Car, what is later referred to as the IndyCar racing circuit. Folks like Bobby Unser and A.J. Foyt, Gordon Johncock, and Roger McCluskey were represented from there. And then the rest of the field was filled in by what was then known as the NASCAR Winston Cup Series, the stock car series, what we now know as the as NASCAR's sort of top tier. David Pearson, part of that, Bobby Allison, and of course the king, Richard Petty. All of those gentlemen, all those 12 guys, were the initial crowd and crew that were the racing field for this IROC series. Now, Mark Donohue, I don't mean to sort of spoil it for you, but you know, this happened how many years ago? Can-Am expert, ran away with it, although George Fulmer won one of the 4 races. But it was fascinating on a whole different bunch of levels. How racers sort of adjusted, which racers tended to do better or worse. Now, you also have to remember, too, that all 4 of these races in this first season were run on road courses, right? So the road specialists, if you will, or those with ample road racing experience, pretty much had the sort of inside track, if you will. But I digress. There's a whole sort of series of events and stories and situations in the buildup, the launch, and then the actual racing of this fascinating series that kept a lot of driving fans' attention over the years, even as it changed in various fits and starts. This IROC series, the International Race of Champions, we're going to get into the first year of it and the cars behind it in our conversation this week with Matt Stone. And oh, by the way, the very last champion of the IROC series in 2006, it was then known as the Crown Royal IROC series, was a guy named Tony Stewart. Yes, the very same Tony Stewart that's part of the Superstar Racing Experience, SRX, that is on your television sets on Saturday nights this summer on CBS. And what is that format? Well, it's short tracks, but it's the same idea. Cars similarly created, similarly situated and attuned, racing from various different disciplines represented, and seeing just who is the best over a course of 6 races across short tracks all across America. Gee, I wonder where Tony got the idea. And it just speaks to the spirit of this IROC series that many, many people, both car collectors, current race fans, and others, just it has lore, it has a place in racing history, and the ideas are as timely as today's events. And we're happy to have Matt Stone in our conversation this week as we get into IROC, the first year of it, coming up in just a few moments' time. First, a quick promotional message. Let's spin the dial, shall we? And it lands this week on our friends at sportshistorycollectibles.com. Hello, Dean Mitchell, that is, in San Diego. How you doing? I love the new look and feel of the site. I love the tons of new inventory that's coming in there. And there's just great, great stuff across all kinds of sports in the realm of memorabilia at sportshistorycollectibles.com. It's memorabilia of all the leagues that thrived, failed, and shaped, just like this week with IROC, the North American sports landscape of today. You're into football, baseball, soccer, hoops, hockey, and various miscellany. We get into racing. There's tons of great racing programs for all kinds of events from years past. Olympic stuff, that's coming up. They've got all kinds of stuff there. Tennis, postcards, stadiums, you name it. All kinds of great stuff. There is just an ample supply. And there's more, like I said, stuff just about every week coming in and at sportshistorycollectibles.com. And of course, we have a promo code. You got to write it down. You got to save it. You got to use it when you go to the site early and often. It's Good Seats. Promo code Good Seats. I think it's one word, if I'm not mistaken, Dean. Yeah, Good Seats. And you're going to get 15% off all of your purchases when you go to sportshistorycollectibles.com. Just add that code, Good Seats, at checkout, And please enjoy, courtesy of us and Dean, 15% off. And we, of course, appreciate Dean's longtime sponsorship of this little show. We also appreciate Dean posting some of his favorite episodes of this show on the website there, too. So it's kind of a round trip, so to speak. So go buy some stuff and then just click over on his site and go back to our archives and listen to some of the other great episodes that we've dialed up for you over the last 4 years. And keep going back and just, keep going around and around and around. You'll never have to leave. And you're welcome in advance. All right. So let's get into it. Even if you're not a race fan, you're going to enjoy this conversation. You will certainly enjoy the book. The visuals alone are fantastic. And as that clip at the beginning of the show sort of hinted at, the ABC Wide World of Sports presentation with Keith Jackson calling all the action in pre-recorded form. That's how it was delivered. Here's the fascinating tale of the beginnings of the IROC series, the very first year, that 1973-74 season. Here's our conversation with Matt Stone. We had just a couple of weeks back. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy.
I am a born and raised in Southern California car fool. My dad was a car guy from way back in the hot rod days, and I inherited the mutant gene of car guy from him, because we always had interesting cars around the house, and we went to car shows and we went to races, and we went out every year when all the new cars came out and picked up all the brochures and looked at all the new cars. And so I was kind of a car guy from birth, I guess you might say. And my other big hobby was photography. So what did I shoot? Cars, naturally. And actually, career-wise, started off in the real estate business, and then kind of started dabbling in freelance photography and freelance writing. And one night, about 30 years ago, the two just kind of met and crossed in the middle of the night. And I gave up my day job, to use your term, and decided to hang my shingle as a freelance writer and photographer. And I've been doing that for 30 years. And along with just general automotive enthusiasm, I love motorsport. I love racing, the guys, the drivers, the cars, the speed, the stories, the whole deal. So that's a little bit about me, gasoline in my veins, and I just, anything to do with cars, be it technology, motorsport, history, design, pop culture, interview, in almost any angle that you could mention with involving transportation is my involvement, my interest, and I'm your neighborhood car guy.
Okay, so I think the next question that I need to ask then is, what kind of car guy, and or maybe more pointedly, what kind of racing do you sort of find yourself most aligned to, or most affiliated towards? Because, and this is a very amateurish kind of question, right? Because I'm not sort of a long-time, deeply rooted racing fan, although I do admit to being intrigued with NASCAR of late, and the SRX series, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I think it's important to kind of maybe set that base, because there seems to be like typecasts right here, right? You're either you're an Indy guy, or you're a Formula One buff, or really into the off-road thing, or you're kind of a NASCAR stock car kind of guy. Can one be multiple? It seems to me the answer to that is generally no, but school me as to what you are, and if that's even a right frame of reference.
It's a more than fair question, one that I have been asked and answered many times, and completely fair, because everybody is different. It's like, well, do you like music? Yes. Well, there's got to be more to it than that. But I would say I'm generally an automotive omnivore. I pretty much eat all meat. And I like sports cars and the classics and hot rods and all sorts of genre of cars, old, new, and otherwise. So I'm pretty much an omnivore there. And in motorsport, I would say generally the same. If I had to pick types of racing that appeal to me most, it would be road racing, road course racing with turns left and right, and sports cars and endurance racing in Le Mans and Sebring and Daytona and all that kind of stuff. So I'm a sports car racer guy, although I certainly pay attention to Indy and Formula One, and I've been to a lot of drag races in my day, and I find something to enjoy in most of it. But I am generally a road racer type, but that's not exclusionary. I don't put down all the other sports that other people tend to like, but that's kind of my bent.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because road racing obviously very different and irrespective, right, of the actual chassis or type of car, right, that's doing the racing, right? The various road courses like Road America and stuff, or the one down in Austin, which name escapes me of late, that will handle Indy cars or NASCAR or any other sort of kinds of things, right? So that nature, that kind of racing, right, seems to me, again, sort of the amateur sort of occasional interested party seems to be, I don't know, I want to call it more grueling because it's a different kind of grueling, but requires a little bit more, I don't know, I think a broader palette of skills perhaps versus speed and agility when, say, one's going around in circles or tri-ovals and that kind of stuff, because you are turning left and right and gear shifting and going down and up hills and all that kind of stuff. It seems like it's more complicated to me.
I think it's more faceted, that's for sure. And I'm not going to minimize or marginalize IndyCar racers or oval racers or any of that, because that's a whole different set of skills that also takes huge talent and a lot of fortitude. But I guess that's what's appealed to me about road racing. And Formula One, which you mentioned, is road racing. And actually the NASCAR boys, a couple of times a year, they go road racing on road courses with them big old stockers. So, but yes, you're right. I mean, to me, there's so much going on in a road race. You got to be looking forward and backward and sideways, and you're accelerating, and then you're decelerating, and you're braking, and you're shifting, and you're doing all that kind of stuff. And to me, it's just the most rewarding type of driving to do. And I believe because, not to get overly philosophical, but it involves all four of your extremities. You're clutching and shifting and braking, and you got the wheel in one hand and generally a shifter in the other. And to me, it just involves your whole gyroscope. But that's what appeals to me. I just love road racing, but again, not at the exclusion or expense of what other people may enjoy.
Well, it's an important distinction, especially as we kind of sort of turn here in turn 3 into this conversation around this thing known as the International Race of Champions. You may know that we had Dave Lockton on our show about 6 months ago, he being kind of the chief cook and bottle washer for Riverside, the long since forgotten Riverside International Raceway, where the first set of IROC races occurred, which happened to be a pretty well regarded, at least at the time for its short period of life, a road course of extraordinary twists, turns, and skills needed to kind of to conquer it. So maybe a little sort of background as to your interest in IROC. I got a feeling it had something to do maybe with the road race element of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I lived at the time in Upland, which is about 25 miles to the west of where Riverside was. So that was sort of my home racetrack. And I went to a lot of races there. I mean, professional sports car races, IMSA and that series, which you may have heard of, and a lot of road races at Riverside. It was a magical place in the kind of the middle of nowhere in Riverside County in what is now called Moreno Valley. But anyway, Riverside was a large, fast, and yet very technical racetrack. All kinds of sports cars and other cars raced there. They used to run NASCAR there. Dan Gurney won the NASCAR race at Riverside 5 times. Figure that. And And then when IROC came about, and I don't wish to cause any sort of major debate with Mr. Lockton, but once IROC got off the ground in its final form, I am not sure that David B. Lockton was involved in the final form of IROC, but no matter.
No, I think he would agree with that. By the way, it was the Ontario Motor Speedway that he was.
Yes, I was going to say.
My mistake.
OMS. OMS, yeah.
I do mix up the Southern California courses of yours. No, I think
that's a shame because they're both gone.
Sadly, for sure. But no, Dave did indeed sort of a demur quite a bit on that, right? I think he sort of fashions himself as being somewhat of an initial ideator in partnership with other people thinking similarly. And I think perhaps because of his position at the time of OMS, Ontario Motor Speedway, him having a desire to at least perhaps throw Ontario into the ring as a place perhaps where this idea could come into fruition. I think he had moved on since then. And I think others, as we'll talk about, truly put pedal to the metal, so to speak, to put the arms and legs around this to make it actually occur.
Yes, and that triumvirate was Roger Penske, who needs little introduction in anything to do with cars or racing. Another guy named Michael Phelps, who was primarily a marketing and advertising guy. He put the deal together with ABC's Wide World of Sports, which we all know and remember and love. And then the third guy, let me bring his name to the forefront in my head at the moment. Les Richter. Les Richter was the manager of Riverside International Raceway, a former Los Angeles Rams fullback, I believe, who grew up in sports, and then when he retired from the Rams, he stayed in sports management. And so it was those three guys that put IROC together, and Mr. Penske was primarily in charge of putting the cars and the car deal together, logical enough. Les Richter was in charge of the facilities and the drivers, and then Mike Phelps handled the TV deal and the marketing. So you are somewhat correct that I wouldn't say it was a made-for-TV series, but it sort of almost kind of was. TV was an absolute element of IROC from the beginning, and it was designed just for that reason, and that's why the cars were all painted very much jelly bean or M&M colors, so they would look great on television, and why the driver's name was on the windshield and on the door, so that way when you were looking at that green Porsche going by, you'd know if it was David Pearson, George Fulmer, or Mark Donohue, or your favorite driver or not. And the visibility on television was a huge, important, elemental aspect of IROC.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember too that in the early 1970s, right, we were talking about a media landscape, especially in television. Well, it was far different than what it is today, right? I mean, you're really talking about three major networks and maybe in each market a handful of independent TV stations, and being on ABC, right, one of the only three networks really, was a gigantic deal, right? So in many respects, it was a third, if you will, of the television sports realm. ABC at the time, right, being the broadcaster of the Indianapolis 500, right? Probably a lot of leverage, so to speak, in terms of being at Wide World of Sports, frankly, being, this is prior to CBS sort of breaking out years later with the that memorable Daytona 500 when there was a big snowstorm on the East Coast on Valentine's Day. Mm-hmm. The only time that most quote unquote average Americans outside of, say, the Deep South were seeing full on NASCAR stock car races were in the tape delayed edited versions in Wide World of Sports, right? So it seemed to me that CBS, that ABC at that time especially was really kind of, I think, of the three major networks, was really I would call it the arbiter of motorsports in this country when it comes to television. But certainly was probably the most
absolutely true. Yeah. The most familiar and the most prevalent. They also, whenever you watched a tape delayed broadcast of the Monaco Grand Prix, who nobody saw Formula One other than on Wide World of Sports. And what few IndyCar races they broadcast were on ABC. And yeah, Wide World of Sports was the something of triumph and the agony of defeat. So they not only were the prevalent players, they had the experience, the broadcasters, and the cameras and equipment to cover a race. I mean, they knew better than anybody at the time how to do that. Some of it was still shot on film, if you can believe that, although most of it was taped. There were no in-car cameras, no rotating in-car cameras, or you never heard, if there were radios, you never heard the driver and the team talking. I mean, but still, they were pretty advanced, or at least competent, given the technology of the day. And of course, you know, a camera that's as big as your house and microphones that had cords, they were as good as anybody did for broadcasting motorsport back in 1973 and 74. That's for sure.
Well, no, and you look at some of those clips on YouTube. I mean, it was an event. I mean, Keith Jackson was sort of, Jackie Stewart. They were, they were putting all their efforts behind us. Certainly in the very first years, I think it became more of a Wide World of Sports kind of fill-in thing as the years wore on. But they were all in at the very beginning. Well,
sure, at the very beginning, of course. Part of the reason for that is that the first year of the series was, that's why I did this book on primarily the first season, was the most international roster of drivers that the series ever had. I mean, in that year alone, you had multiple Formula One champions, multiple Indy 500 winners, several IndyCar champions. And I mean, those were the biggest of guns at that time. So they really put a lot into it, and Goodyear was a sponsor of the series and provided the tires and also provided the blimp. So that allowed, the cameras to go up in the air and float over Riverside and Daytona, getting those massive giant pictures that they did at the time in color, which was pretty cool stuff. I mean, there was not a lot of motorsport that had that kind of coverage back then. So they did a good job.
Well, and also too, I guess road racing specifically, right? I mean, I would imagine that most of the road course racing that national television audiences had seen up until that point was probably of the edited and, consolidated kind of presentation, no?
Yes, fair statement. They did not, of course, cover Formula One live. Nobody covered any of that stuff live. Pardon me. But when you saw the rebroadcast of the Monaco Grand Prix, for example, it was edited and shortened, and you got the highlights, and you saw the winner and the champagne and the kiss and the flowers and all that. But you never saw flag-to-flag racing covered in road racing covered on television. It just didn't happen. So the fact that it's another reason that these races were, 75-mile races, 30 laps or whatever they were, is that they were easily packageable on television. And you could see the whole race in half an hour, 40-minute show. And that is a key element of what IROC was ideally packaged for television.
All right, well, let's set up this first IROC. We're talking about 1973, late 1973 and early 1974. It was basically 4 races spread across that period of time. Actually, I think 3 of them were at Riverside on a weekend of October 27th and 28th of 73. And then there was the road course at Daytona on February 14th of 74. But it's interesting to me because, and obviously the focus of this lushly created and gorgeous looking book that you have out there. I won't be promoting the hell out of it during the beginning and the end of the show. And when we get
thank you very much.
Well, yeah, there you go. Well, God forbid we'll help you sell a few extra books. But this looks to me in hindsight, right, as primarily and maybe on purpose or maybe not on purpose. I don't know. You tell me. A road course specific event, which is not what it ultimately evolved to in the years later. But the road course specialty was prime in the skill set here, as we sort of established earlier for this, and obviously the choice of car for such accordingly.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And funny enough, at the end of the season, a couple of the drivers who were primarily oval racer Indy guys said, you know what? This was fun, and I've learned a lot, or I didn't, or I loved it, or I hated it. But we really should do 2 races on an oval and 2 races on a road course. Very compelling thought. And that's what they went to a little later. And then for a year or two, they only did ovals. And then they brought back Daytona road course. And, you know, that was about the time the series was beginning to wane a little bit. But you're right. It was an interesting formula. And some of the IndyCar guys who were not, and the NASCAR guys who were not necessarily as proficient or as deep in road racing, didn't like the format a lot. Although a couple of them, David Pearson and Bobby Allison among them, were particularly good road racers. Those guys were good old boys, but they could turn both directions, and often led or often figured in the road races. So Pearson and Allison truly got it. AJ Foyt was an exceptional road racer, but not familiar with the Porsches. And then some of the, I wouldn't say older school guys like Gordon Johncock and Roger McCluskey, they didn't like it at all.
Well, so so then why? So the idea of this sort of, I guess you'd call it, I want to call it an all-star race. I guess sort of it was, right? A cross-discipline sort of test, if you will. But why was this? And I'm sure there are reasons. I'm sure Messrs. Richter, Penske, and Phelps, had ideas as to why they wanted to do it this way, at least at the outset. But why was it so full on road course racing when, to your point, these guys are coming from various disciplines? I'm just curious as to why this road racing was determined as being maybe the supposed arbiter of skill across all these different disciplines when guys were coming from all over the place.
That's an absolutely fair question. I will say that some of it was ultimately dictated by the schedule. Remember, you had guys coming from all around the world, and they couldn't say, oh, well, fly in this weekend for Riverside, and then 2 weeks from now we'll go to Indy, and then we'll do another race at Michigan, and then we'll go to Daytona. They packed it all in the first 3 heat races into one weekend, and that necessitated that the circuit stay at one track in 110. I think, we're at a different set of circumstances. They might have put an oval in there. They could have gone to Ontario for one of the races, but for whatever reason did not pick. But I would agree that is a fascinating question that I can't answer with absolute certainty. I believe the reason was to keep the circus in 110. They had the whole show at Riverside for one weekend. They did it there, and I think the other reason might have been to challenge all the champions with the theoretically most challenging type of motorsport.
Do you think Porsche was behind some of that too, being good at what they do, especially? No. Okay. I was thinking maybe that as they maybe were stepping up and saying, hey, we're especially good in this type of car. Maybe that had some influence.
No, they didn't have, certainly they had influence, but that was not part of the reason for choosing Porsche, nor did Porsche get to dictate where the venues were. That was not that type of relationship. So in any case, interesting, and maybe next time I speak with Roger Penske, I may ask him that point a little more pointedly. But as I understand, most of the reason for that is they wanted to keep the entire circuit in the same tent over one weekend. Now, Ontario was 40 minutes away. They certainly could have hauled the show over there and run the oval, but for one reason, chose not to. But in any case, I think it also was to really test and challenge everybody's versatility, which it certainly did. But that's what I know of it. But Porsche had nothing to do with that, and I think it was more just scheduling logistics than anything.
How about the cars then, right? Because one of the fundamental elements of a race like this, as originally envisioned, right, is that in theory, everybody would be racing the same type of car with the same package setup, the same, everything the same to the extent that they could be the same, right? No special alterations, no special crews with the, in essence, trying to keep it as equitable and as straightforward and as equal as possible. Maybe a little bit of insight into the makeup of this Porsche Carrera car, which was the chosen chassis and body and engine and vehicle for this first ever IROC race.
That's absolutely true. As a matter of fact, so much so, I'll tell you a little bit more about the car in detail, but so much so that Penske nor anybody else was allowed to maintain those cars. There were Porsche mechanics that came here to America from Stuttgart, and they cranked on the cars. And they didn't want Penske or anybody's pit guys or anybody's mechanic anywhere near the car. And I mean, in between races, they were locked in a warehouse with a guard. Nobody touched those cars but Porsche's own mechanics. So that way there would not be any favoritism. As a matter of fact, George Fulmer, who one of the drivers and who wrote the foreword for my book, he said that when they were testing and practicing with the cars, if they found out that one car was perhaps not quite as crisp as another, or maybe a little faster than another, those would stay as practice cars. They did their best to shake down everything and put together a field of 12 as identical and evenly matched cars as they could. And they were Jim Dandy cars too. Porsche 3-liter RSR, which is Racing Sportrennen or Rennsport. The big wide fenders and the whale tail wings and a 3-liter fuel injected naturally aspirated engine, 5-speed manual transaxle, very analog car. I mean, there was no computers back then. There was no paddle shifters. I mean, you had to drive these things. And they were very well balanced, certainly fast enough, and based on a stiffened and enhanced, but architecturally stock production Porsche 911 Carrera shell.
Which means they were probably best of their breed, if you will, for tackling any kind of road course out there, right? I mean,
yes, that's a fair statement. They were good. They were sports cars that were, tweaked up to a higher level than a street 911. I mean, they had big wide wheels and big tires and big brakes off a 917 race car, flared fenders and oil coolers and a wing on the back and all that stuff. And I mean, they were superb, road course kind of cars. They were fast enough to really get rolling down a straight, but something over 300 horsepower, which doesn't sound like a lot today, but was a lot in a fairly lightweight car back then, air-cooled, of course. And they were terrific on a road course. And I believe an ideal weapon for that job. And they were well chosen and well spec'd for the job. And the guys who were really superb road racers could crank a lot out of them, and did. But yeah, the main goal, and you hit it on the head, is that Porsche built them as equally as human hands could build them, and then they ensured that only those German hands touched them. And every race, each driver got a new car, got a different car. So that was another equalizing factor there. Also fascinating, I'm getting off track a little, but they went with an inverted start for each subsequent race. So whoever finished last in the first race started from pole on the second race. So they inverted the whole start to put the fast guys at the back and make them work to the front. And then the guys who maybe weren't as fast started at the front, and it was up to them to try to stay there. But every race, they switched cars. And I think that was also critical because, you know, if a car was a little faster, a little slower, or suited one driver better than another, or this guy liked the green car and that guy liked the black car, that deck got reshuffled with every deal. And that was important. And I know was a big part of the scheme, and if that's the right word, of the plan to level the playing field in every way possible.
Yeah, and the level of detail in your book, IROC Porsches, it's fascinating to me. This is the whole part of it that I, didn't know before. I mean, you go to the level of detail of literally describing each of the cars' history and then who was driving which car, right? So the black car was, had a couple of different drivers and stuff, and you've even tracked the history of these automobiles in the years since as they traded hands and whatnot. But it to me that seems to be one of the ultimate ways, I guess, to try to keep things equitable is to indeed shuffle the deck, so to speak, right? It's almost like truly like shuffling a deck in a game of cards, right? After every hand, you want to sort of give everybody a fair shot, a fair change again to try again. Now, was that inversion process, was that the first time, I guess, maybe that was sort of introduced to the auto racing world that you know of? Because obviously that's a staple now of, say, NASCAR all-star races and the like, that inversion.
I do not know that if it was specifically the first time. I believe it had been done somewhere similarly. But however, it certainly was an effective tool to take care of a naysayer. Any naysayer should say, "Oh, he's got the better car." Well, if he happened to have a better car for race 2, he didn't have it for race 3. And if they had 3 spare cars, that if a car got damaged in a race, they just wheeled up another one. So the equalizers were multi-level, and I think it was very effective and very smart on behalf of the organizers. So any of the naysayers would say, "Oh, well, Mark Donohue, he drove for Penske, so he got the best car." Well, no, he didn't. He might have lucked into a good car once or twice or 3 times, but he wasn't assigned the best car. For the first race, they drew straws. Okay, you drew a straw and you got car number 9, it was the green one. And then the next race, there was a rotational scheme that you got another car. If a car got wrecked, they wheeled up another one. So they worked diligently, I would say, and fairly to level the field to the extent possible.
How much prep did these guys have? And in your investigation in putting this book together, were you able to maybe historically or forensically determine whether some of these cars were actually better than others, or is that just speculation?
To answer your first question, they had a test and practice day. I think it was the day before the first race, or in the days before the first race. And all the drivers were there. And I want to say they went out and did 25 or 30 laps, and they were timed. And then they might have traded cars, and they went out and did more laps. So they had, they didn't have days and weeks of practice, but they did have time in the cars before race number 1, green flag. So they didn't go in completely cold. But again, it was not like, where they're a member of a race team where they may have said, "Oh, we're going to go out testing for a week." That didn't happen. They had a day. And I want to say it was about 50 laps that they did in at least 2 cars. And could we determine that one car was better or worse than another? Not substantially. There was one car that just seemed to be fast. Now, granted, a couple of guys drove it fast. A couple of fast guys drove it, so it might have been that. But there was one.
Do you remember what color that one was?
In my opinion, the black one.
Okay.
The black one, chassis 0124, I believe, was just ever so slightly sharper. Faster is probably not the right word, because it won 2 races, 2 of the 4 races. And I mean, that's pretty good in that field amongst those guys, about that many cars. If one car rose to the top twice, it was definitely no slug. But it was
that car, and that was 2 different drivers, right? One was Mark Donohue, who won 3 of the 4 races, and I'm guessing George Fulmer, who was the other guy who run the race. Was that the case with the 2?
That's correct.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
correct.
So the black car did finish first. Although that said, right now we can get into speculation. Fulmer and Donohue were both Can-Am guys, right? So they arguably had a better sort of read on what a road course situation would be like.
Yeah, those 2 guys were big game National League all-star road racers, no doubt about it. I mean, they were seriously capable road racers and had a lot of experience in Porsche. So there's no doubt. I mean, that car did well in good hands. But generally speaking, the cars were as reasonably equal as hands could make them. And the fact that the deck got reshuffled every race tend to flatten out some of the bumps. And I was as fair as I believe it could be humanly made.
How are the drivers chosen, to your knowledge? I'm sure between Messrs. Donohue and Fulmer, and I guess Peter Revson, between his Formula One stuff, also was a Can-Am guy too. But the rest came from Winston Cup, what was then called the Winston Cup, which is today's top level NASCAR. There's the Champ Car. Formula One was a place from which they chose. Do you have any sense of how these folks were chosen? Was there a qualification process, or was it sort of just done maybe with the mindset of high wattage names that people might recognize?
A little bit of both. I wouldn't say there was a qualification process per se, but yeah, high wattage names were important. Like, okay, we want a couple of Formula One guys, so let's pick a couple of Formula One champions like Dennis Hulme and Emerson Fittipaldi. We want a couple of Indy winners, so they got a couple of them: Bobby Unser, AJ Foyt, and
Gordon Johncock was in there.
Gordon Johncock, yeah. Roger McCluskey. So they got those guys. And then they said, well, now let's get some. Well, George and Mark both raced Trans Am. So they had another layer of road course complication there. And yeah, it was kind of like that. Who are the dozen most high wattage names is a good way to put it, that will really, that everybody will know, everybody on TV could root for and at the races. Although I will tell you, it is interesting, there were 2 rather huge names that were not there. Can you guess?
Well, one's got to be Mario Andretti.
Bingo. Next.
You got me on the other one.
Okay, Al Unser.
Sure.
And the reason is simple, and unfortunate, but simple. Both of those guys were, but this is back when they did such things, had tire exclusivity contracts with Firestone. And Goodyear was IROC was a Goodyear series. So they both had exclusivity contracts that paid them a lot of money, I'm sure. And they were going to go break those contracts to go run IROC. Mario was there at one of the tests and I guess was looking around and checking. They wanted him bad. And but Mario and Al Sr. could not do it, although both of them subsequently later, when the Firestone exclusivity clauses and contracts went away, both Mario and Big Al joined the series and won the championship. So they were the right guys.
They both came in 2 years later. I know Mario finished second 2 years later, but then so that's, but it was probably also a bit of a testament to how I guess serious and important and cool this IROC idea was becoming.
Well, yeah, when you've got the guys they had, They had about as good as there was anywhere in the world at the time. And a couple of others people may ask questions about, what about Dan Gurney and what about Jackie Stewart?
Sure.
One of the rules is that you needed to be a still working professional racing driver at the time of the IROC qualification race, at the time of the races. And both Gurney and Stewart had each just retired. Stewart was in the early discussions, but he retired and therefore was out, and would have been spectacular in my opinion. I mean, would have been a competitor for sure, but ended up being the broadcast color commentator on ABC, and that was fine because he added a lot of value to that. And the drivers knew and respected him, and his interviews with the drivers were good. And but I can only imagine, had the thing happened a year earlier, if Dan Gurney and Jackie Stewart would have been there, would have been a ton of fun. I'd have watched that 40 more times.
Well, so how did this initial IROC then play out? You have 4 races, 3 of which are at Riverside. They're all road courses. They're all in the Porsche Carrera RSR race car. Clearly, the road racing guys, maybe predictably, maybe it wasn't predictably at the time, did really well. I mean, George Fulmer won one of the 4 races. He finished 5th for the series, and Mark Donohue was, 3 out of the 4 he won and ran away with it. He was probably, I'm just looking at these names, maybe one of the lesser known guys of all of these 12 that were racing when it came to general knowledge of race car drivers, ironically.
I'm not completely sure of that. That's a matter of opinion, but you will recall that he was the 1968 and 1969 SCCA champion and the 1972 Indy 500 winner. So he was no shrinking violet by any stretch. And in a lot of circles, was well known. He raced at Le Mans, he raced at Daytona, and raced stock cars. He was a very big gun. But nonetheless, that's kind of what happened. The road racers ended up rising to the top. As I mentioned, the 2 of the better road racing NASCAR guys, they being Bobby Allison, and David Silver Fox Pearson, drove very well, and on occasion led those races. Fittipaldi led here and there, although finished a little bit of mid-pack, and I think he crashed and DNF'd out of one race. Emerson Fittipaldi probably didn't do as well as many people might have predicted him to do, being a Formula One champion. So really, Mark Donohue was dominant, and Revson also had some very good runs. Didn't win a race, didn't finish as high as some people might have thought he would, but generally the road racers won and finished the best. A couple of the top NASCAR guys did very well, and then the rest of them up and down the pack. Sometimes they'd finish 11th, and the next race they finished 3rd. Bobby Unser drove very well. Multiple second place finishes, I believe, or 3rds. Bobby Unser was one of those guys that would be fast on a lawnmower or a tractor, and hated the cars. He did not like these cars at all. I don't think he had anything against Porsches, but he didn't like the way they handled. They were a little tail heavy, oversteered some, and not every driver likes that. But anyway, Bobby Unser drove very well. I would say the 2 fishes most out of water were Roger McCluskey and Gordon Johncock. Gordon Johncock, by his own admission, he says, I just didn't jump into a whole new kind of car and go fast. He said, it takes me time to learn the lay of the land, learn the car, and get up to speed. He wasn't making an excuse. He said, but that's my deal. I don't jump into something new and go fast. McCluskey just did not have a lot of experience in road racing, nor Porsches. Dennis Holm, a Can-Am and a Formula One champ, a terrific world-class road racer, was a mid-packer pretty much the whole way. He started and finished all 3 of the heat races in the middle, started in the middle, finished in the middle. never was a factor. And home was a charge-up. I mean, you race McLaren Can-Ams, you're good. And Formula Ones and Brabhams, I think, and McLarens. And, Dennis Hulme was a racer's racer and a half, and was no better than mid-pack. A.J. Foyt, by his own admission, said prior to the third heat race, he says, I'm just starting to come to grips with these little Porsches. And he was starting to get comfortable with them. And I think had there been more races and more heats, Foyt might have done better. He did qualify for the finale, the prom at Daytona. And unfortunately, didn't do terribly well or terribly bad there. But Foyt, I believe, was on the verge of breaking through with the cars. And Pearson ran very well. Like I say, you go up and down the lineup, and another surprise or not surprise, and I can quote the late great Bobby Unser in this regard, was Richard Petty. Richard Petty just didn't do particularly well. And in the words of Bobby Unser, he said, well, Richard Petty is a world-class, outstanding racing driver. But it just wasn't his kind of deal. And that's a quote. So, Petty was very mid-pack too, although smiling the whole way and seemed to be having fun. But nonetheless, you go up and down the roster of finishers, and there's kind of reasons and understanding for where they finished and where they started and who had trouble and who didn't. But in my mind, that series, that first season of the series, was just a unicorn in motorsports. Just the best of the guys that 1973 had to offer in 74, short of Mario and Al, who couldn't due to technical reasons, but a dozen truly world-class drivers banging it out to kind of see who was best for bragging rights, money, and fun. And what's better than that?
Yeah, to Petty's credit, he plowed on for, I think, through the 5 races of IROC, right? So it wasn't like he wasn't having fun, or at least trying to do it. Well, let me ask you this then. So what do you, of that first season then? So, I mean, how'd it go? Right. Obviously the competition was good. It was all brand new and certainly drew a lot of excitement. I'm ignorant on how the ratings were. I'm also, though, interested as to what the sort of after season assessment was, because the Porsche cars didn't come back, and the series did sort of retool a little bit, going away from sole road racing and completely in different directions when it came to car chassis, not only in the second year, but going forward.
Yeah, that's a very fair question. On the whole, it was judged a success and continued for 26 seasons over 30 years with a similar but evolved formula. The reason the Porsches went away is they were, naturally you'd expect, somewhat expensive to build and to run. They were replaced by Camaros, and then ultimately by a couple of different Dodges and by Firebirds, and there were Chevys, Pontiacs, and Dodges that came along in subsequent seasons. They were just cheaper to build and run, and were more comfortable for the NASCAR guys, and were probably more ideally suited to ovals. Because after the first year, they started, as I think it was McCluskey or John Cock that suggested, they'd run, 2 road race courses and 2 ovals in a season. And that tended to even out the playing field a little further in terms of venue. And same thing, the cars changed every race, and they had inverted starts. I mean, all the basic structure stayed the same, except for the cars changed and a couple of the venues changed. So by all the TV ratings, I understand, were good and very good. And because anybody that wanted to watch racing, they did it on Wide World of Sports, and any racing that was on, that people watched it, and it was guys that they knew and could root for in cars that they recognized. And then it was 2 generations of Camaros that came later and 2 generations of Dodges. And then they went to Firebirds. And then after they stopped making the Pontiac Firebird, they just called it the IROC Racer, even though it was still a Firebird. It's kind of funny. They stripped all the Pontiac badges off of them, and they were just IROC cars at that point, even though they looked just like Firebirds that they used to make.
Somebody missed the marketing memo with that.
Yeah, I would say so.
Well, but it's also interesting, though, Matt, that and again, hindsight is 20/20, right? But
of course,
the move to, I mean, essentially, they became stock. It was a stock car chassis kind of setup.
Yep.
From year 2 onward, right? And as the years went on, right, the knock against IROC was, if you will, it might have been even on all these other sort of metrics and setups, but at the end of the day, the ultimate arbiter was that the fact that the car was, if you will, a stock car sort of body. And guess what? That's probably, and it showed in the results generally, to the advantage of the NASCAR guys.
That's absolutely true. And as a matter of fact, both George Fulmer and Mike Phelps said that after a while, it kind of became a junior NASCAR series, for better or for worse. I will submit one small correction to your comment. The first generation of the Camaros that they ran, beginning in 1974-5, they were based on production cars. They were not tube framers. That came along a few years later. But ultimately, you are correct. They went to what they call silhouette racers, which means a body that looks like a Camaro on a tube frame. And they were junior NASCAR racers from about year 5 on. And they were very effective because those cars were good on ovals and on the road courses, and they were built to be good in both. And the NASCAR guys were much more comfortable in them. And of course, Chevrolet put a bunch of marketing money behind it and sold IROC Z Camaros on the street. And it was a very effective tool. But you're right. After a while, they went to an all oval formula, and you were getting less and less international drivers coming to participate. And that, to me, is kind of where it all, I don't want to went south, but the original vision was obscured by that. It wasn't very international anymore. There were some guys from other countries and other series, but mostly after a while, it got to be IndyCar guys and good old boys. And that's what it kind of was at the end, for better or worse. And it was something very different. And I don't think it was as good, honestly. And I'm not picking on the NASCAR guys or the American chassis and engines, but it just became less international and was much less true to the original spirit of the event. And I asked Roger Penske, and I imagine this is your next question. I asked Roger Penske, well, why did it end? It was such a great formula. Why did it end? And it's very logical. He said, we got into issues of exclusivity and sponsorship and contract. He says, it's pretty hard to have a Ford contracted driver out there racing a Pontiac and saying, boy, my Pontiac ran great today. So the conflicts between drivers, engines, chassis, and brands is ultimately what made the series more cumbersome than it was worth. So that's kind of where it ended up. They ended up shutting it down. It was 26 seasons over 30 years. And it had a good run. I mean, you think about it; it's a good run for a series that doesn't date back to the 1910s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever. It was sort of a manufactured series out of an idea, and had a 30-year run. That's in any measure, and because television and movies and series and all that, a 30-year run on anything is terrific.
Yeah, well, it's also interesting, too, because I think, I guess my really last question is sort of the legacy, because the idea really sort of hasn't gone away. I think a lot of people are sort of throwing back to how cool the concept was. I mean, I think ultimately, right, you know, the best way in a perfect world, right, would be to have all these drivers from these different disciplines be in all of the different cars involved from their disciplines as well. Right? And that's hard, right? A stock car guy is not going to jump into a Formula One vehicle and be able to, I mean, it's just kind of just borderline impossible, right? But if you truly wanted to be equal, right, everybody would get a shot in the cars in the series, you know, from the series that they were from. So in some respects, it almost feels to me like it may be an impossible task. Although, going back to the nostalgia and calling back, right, everything old is new again, which is a constant theme of this little show, right? You know, nothing is new under the sun, and this superstar racing experience that Tony Stewart and Evernham and others have sort of put together is an interesting twist, and they have not been shy about, especially Stewart, calling back IROC and saying, you know, we're trying to go back to that spirit where it's from racers, not just guys, by the way, which is an improvement, and not just white guys, and not just white guys either, which is also an improvement, to, you know, go back to the spirit of from multiple disciplines and maybe with a twist, right, going to the short track sort of roots, if you will, of racing in the United States, at least.
Oh yeah, definitely.
In theoretically similar cars, right? But in this case, Evernham, I never can say his name right. Evernham.
There's no G. There's no G. Evernham.
Right. Evernham. There you go. That's probably why it's hard for me to say, but I digress. There's no make or model on this. I look at those cars though, and the first couple of weeks of that on CBS, and I don't know, they look like bricks to me. But maybe that's part of the concession one has to make in order to make something that is truly new for everybody versus sort of being deferential to one type of racing.
That's true. And that's on purpose because they didn't want to get into that. Okay, well, Chevy, the cars do run Ford engines, but they're not badged as Fords. And there's probably a sticker on them somewhere that says powered by Ford or something like that. But yeah, the body design is somewhat innocuous on purpose. That's an SRX car. It's just a little more generic. And so you don't get into those sorts of brand allegiance issues. And equal playing field, all built and prepared by the same people. So you don't have this guy's pit crew and that guy's pit crew and his chief mechanic and or her whatever. You know, there's none of that. So and you're right, they unabashedly acknowledge and credit IROC for the formula that now they're doing all these many years later. And the fact that it's, you know, kind of on dirt short courses is fascinating. On short courses, they're trying to make an equal playing field for everybody. Now, ultimately, there may be road courses, and we don't know how long the series will run or where it'll go or how it will evolve. But there's little questions. There is validity in the basic formula. Now, the execution, of course, has many facets. But the formula, people still want to know who's the best. Take all these different disciplines, put them in the same darn car, and run them. And I think there's great appeal in that. And I credit Ray and Tony for understanding that and for their willingness to, I don't want to say pay homage, but to acknowledge and recognize the original IROC series for the genesis of their new series. And I hope it's successful. I watched the first race, it's a lot of fun. So we'll see.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there, and you know, maybe the short tracks is just the easiest way to sort of get the concept out there. But it's interesting as we record this, right? The first 2 weeks, the winners have been short track experts, right? The first one in the venue in Connecticut was sort of the local ringer, which is a really cool idea, by the way, as well. Bringing in the local ringer from the local track to participate with the big brand names and stuff. But I think you're right. I mean, the concept, the general question, right, is always out there, is like who truly is, given equal circumstances, the better driver. And, if I do think though, right, I think we'll see, right? We'll see if some of the Indy drivers or the Formula One drivers can, win one of these races and stuff. But it's tough, right? You're slinging around in the Slinger Speedway, the world's fastest quarter mile, and you throw some dirt on there. I don't know if Tony Kanaan's going to win that race, right? So, I do think you're right? If you can mix it up with at least a couple of different course types, and I love the idea of having the short track in there because I think it's nostalgic. It's the true sort of essence of the sport, but maybe not exclusively. And I got to think that they're thinking bigger than just that. But I think it's a great way to start. And again, you got to kind of you got to tip the hat to the original IROC concept. I guess my last sort of wind-up question for you would be, do you ever think we'll see an IROC sort of, at that sort of top tier level, maybe in the big facilities and that kind of stuff, and maybe an SRX does grow into that? Or would you say that this is sort of a moment in time and maybe it's just kind of, a folly to think that that'll ever sort of come back again?
I believe it's a moment in time. It's a unicorn. I really do. I suspect, as I think I said somewhere in the introduction of my book or maybe in the wrap-up, if you were to put together today's equivalents of those dozen drivers, if you had the top two NASCAR guys, the top two IndyCar guys, Lewis Hamilton and another Formula One pilot, to put together those 12 toppest, pointy edge of the stick guys and gals, it cost $1 billion. I mean, really, I think it was a little bit of a moment in time because I think Mr. Penske is correct that at some point you're going to get into schedule and sponsorship and contract issues that might be too big to overcome. I don't know. SRX is very carefully formulated not to tread on NASCAR turf because, you don't want to poke that bear because that bear can put you out of business overnight. So it has to be any such future for this formula has to be done in such a way that you could get the very toppest and best guys and gals and do it in a way that it does not tread on the other top formulae. And I think with sponsorship schedule, contract, and all of that, I think that would be a mountain a little too high to climb. That's my opinion. I'd love to be wrong, but I just think Mr. Penske put it succinctly that all of the strings that bind got to be a little too binding.
Yeah, and well, Lord knows there's plenty of tracks out there, right? Especially those that have lost recently in the NASCAR schedule shuffle. For example, Chicagoland Speedway, right? Not chosen this year after 10, 15 years of NASCAR top tier goodness, right? So the adoption of road courses and stuff. There's plenty of unexplored or quality venues out there.
Oh goodness, yes, a lot of great tracks that are underutilized.
Yeah, so there could be room. I look, we explore the team concept, right? Like the teams in different cities, right? If you look at some of the newer leagues out there, like the Premier Lacrosse League or some of these others, so it's sort of a touring kind of format. They sort of create these sort of artificial teams and names and stuff. But you could domicile or have a city branded group of racers that kind of literally go. I don't know. There seems to be there's some creativity there, and all that said, right? And the IROC concept that we spent the last hour talking about how at least cool conceptually it was, and for a couple, for a number of years, some really amazing moments and worthwhile memories. It feels to me like there's plenty of room for some, shall we say, creativity and innovation around this kind of stuff. And I don't know, that gives me some kind of hope. And look, you're talking to a guy who's not even a gearhead. I'm not even a historically engaged racing fan. But to me, this is it's cool to kind of sort of see a new idea or a retro version of a new idea come to fruition, because to me, it's interesting, it's different, and it's not sort of same old. And I'm for all of that. So, a fair disclosure, I've watched both SRX races thus far, and I actually drove by Slinger Speedway on my way back from dropping up my older daughter to camp up in northern Wisconsin. Having driven by on the interstate, the exit to Slinger Speedway, just knowing that they were going to be coming in a couple of weeks, and I've never seen a facility like that before. I mean, it's classic, it's old, it's tiny, and it's gritty, and I never would have in a million years imagined to do that without the excitement, I guess, of this new concept, which to me, as a regular Joe, sports fan, got me interested.
Yeah, the validity of the concept is genuine. There's no doubt about that. I mean, as I was saying, some of the realities of execution pose challenges, but I don't believe that the validity or interest in the concept is not prevalent. I agree. I would love to see. To me, however, they would have to get the very top drivers to participate, because it's an interesting series, but it's not International Race of Champions. That's what I want to see.
Are all of the vehicles that were part of that first IROC series still around and in other people's collector hands? Or
yes. They all had somewhat different lives post IROC. Some of them became frontline sports car racers in the IMSA series, and they raced the Daytona and Sebring and all throughout the International Motorsport Association, IMSA series for many years, and some of them were pretty successful, some of them not as much. A couple of them went into hiding in very private collections. Some of them do some vintage racing. One of them, I believe, was damaged pretty badly and glued back together, but they all exist in one form or another. Roger Penske owns one in his museum collection, and Jerry Seinfeld owned one for some number of years. It is also interesting that one of the cars, the Sahara beige car that Emerson Fittipaldi drove in the first race, was subsequently owned by Pablo Escobar, who you will know is one of the great drug lords of Mexico drug lord history. Now, figure that, and this guy, he drove it on the street in Mexico. There's a bit of IROC trivia for you.
Well, talk about a rabbit hole or a series of rabbit holes, right? I mean, just to be able to, how long did it take you to track down all these cars? Or is it relatively easy, or I can't imagine it was?
In some cases, it was. For probably a half a dozen of them, I was able to find owners and histories pretty quickly. Within the Porsche circles and vintage racing circles, there are guys and dealers and owners and race teams that they travel in these circles. You give them a chassis number and they know where it is. And I will also admit that there were 3 or 4 of them that was like an archaeological dig to find a car and get a hold of somebody that could say, oh yeah, I have it, and here's what I'm doing with it, or here's a picture of it. So some of that was challenging, but it was a lot of work. It was, I will be honest with you, Tim, it was months of work to build reasonably detailed and accurate post-IROC histories and current locations of these 15 cars. It was a lot of fun. I mean, it's like, digging for diamonds, but it was a lot of fun. And when you find a diamond, boy, you get excited. But they all lived very different lives, and some of them had successful race cars. Some of them just got put away and kept and went to shows. And one of them was driven on the streets of Mexico by Pablo Escobar. Go figure.
Well, as multifaceted and it's just an amazing little story. I guess the last sort of question I'll throw out there is how much are these going for, would you say?
The last, that's a fair question. The last 2 that have sold were over $2 million cars. So the $2 million 911 is a reality.
Wow, that's pretty amazing, but a testament yet again, right? That there's that sort of history and that sort of recollection, I guess, not only for Porsche collectors, right, but the fact that they were initiating a completely new concept in competitive racing. And hey, look, that's to me, that's why we have these conversations, because it happened in the past. It was influential. It still has layers of influence even today.
Yeah, and, layers of relevance for sure.
Yeah.
And of course, in my business, I'm all about the story. I mean, of course, the cars and the people make the story, but to me, the story has to be good. And this was a good one. Now, just a little reference on a couple of those that I just mentioned. The record, I believe, so far is about $2.4 million for one of these cars. It was the yellow car, which I know Revson drove and John Cock drove and wrecked. And then the yellow car was a significant player in the series, and that was the one owned by Seinfeld. And then he put it up for public auction some years ago. I believe it was $2.4 million. And the Pablo Escobar car is currently on the market at 2.2. I am not aware offhand of any other recent sales prices, but these are valuable, storied, historic cars driven at the time by the best drivers in the world and have lived interesting lives, which are pedigreed and well documented, and they're great stories.
Yeah, the cars as stories, and not only just the race itself. All right, here's the last question. This is all fascinating to me. It's a Pandora's box of questions. Is there any interest in trying to document, probably not as exciting as the first year or the stories of the cars of that first year, but the rest of the series, or is it not as interesting as the first one?
I think it's extremely relevant. And I think cumulatively, it's as interesting.
Yeah, I don't really know if there's any, and I'm not you tell me, I don't know if there's any real authoritative history of it.
No. And I've thought about that and actually had publisher discussions about it. So it is entirely possible.
All right, if we have a vote, it's your life and your work, right? But to me, and again, I'm not even a racing enthusiast per se, but I think even to the racing enthusiast, right? I don't know. It feels like a big gap in the history of motorsports.
If the book buying public and race fan and my publisher likes the idea, I will do it. Because you just look at the drivers. I mean, Mark Martin, everybody knows Mark Martin. 5-time IROC champion. 5 times. Mario was a champion. Foyt was a champion. Bobby Unser won the championship twice. Dale Earnhardt Sr. was a multiple IROC champion. I mean, you look at the list, and it's all in my book. I have a chapter in there called Post IROC or Post Porsche IROC, and I go through season by season, kind of who won and which cars they drove, and there were some pretty epic races and epic names all over the place, and I believe in those subsequent 25 seasons, there's enough of a story for another book, and I'd like to be the guy to do it.
All right, great, interesting, fascinating stuff. And you IROC fans hopefully will be continue to tune into the Superstar Racing Experience on CBS as we see if Tony Stewart can outlast his other 11 challengers in the IROC-inspired SRX short track series. It's fun. It's fun to watch for sure. And I think the competition's starting to heat up. I think it's more of a competition really of some local track ringers, so to speak, some current drivers and a whole bunch of former drivers going at it. And it's fun to watch. And again, I don't consider myself a race fan, but it's intriguing. And I love the fact that it's hearkening back to the IROC series as its inspiration. And it's no surprise, frankly, given Tony Stewart's winning of the final IROC championship back in the day. So let's tell you where you can get this awesome, gorgeous-looking book by Matt. It is called The IROC Porsches, the International Race of Champions Porsches 911 RSR, and the men who raced them. It is published by Motor Books, and you can, of course, get it wherever good books are found. If you'd like to give us a few shekels of referral love by buying it off our website from Amazon, we'd appreciate that. That's at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode number 222 with Matt Stone, and just click through there, and you'll be able to get it delivered, next day, maybe the same day. I don't know how quickly it's being delivered now. And we appreciate that, of course. Matt also, though, will send you an autographed copy if you go through a bookseller that is well regarded and is kind of the locus for all things motorsports writing and publication. It's in Burbank, California. It's called Autobooks-Aerobooks.com. Autobooks, AUTOBOOKS -Aerobooks, AERO books.com. Autobooks-Aerobooks.com. And that is the place where you can get an autographed copy from Matt. It's on 2900 West Magnolia Boulevard in Burbank. I think you could probably even just go there in person in Southern California and ask for the book. And I'm sure Matt will either drive by Toot Sweet and get an autographed copy to you, or he will probably do it after the fact and somehow get it to you. But that's another sort of higher brow way of doing so. And, by the way, God forbid you actually support your local bookseller, and it's a great example of doing just that. And they are newly reopened in the sort of semi-post-pandemic realm. So check them out at autobooks-aerobooks.com and or in person in Burbank for that special touch of an actual signed copy. Matt can also be further followed on his website. Great stuff, great blogging and stuff, great stories. Again, a lot of Motor Trend stories of the past. This guy has been around the block when it comes to auto racing coverage over the last 30 plus years. He can be found at mattstonecars.com, mattstonecars.com. Okay, again, our website one more time is goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's the place, of course, for all of our old episodes, all of our future episodes. You will find a link to our weekly email newsletter. You will also find links to our social media feeds and our email address. But I'll give those to you in short order. Maybe save you a step if you want. On social media, you will find us on Facebook at Good Seats Still Available. On Instagram, you will find us at Good Seats Still Available. On Twitter, you will find us at Good Seats Still. And on email, you can send us one or a bunch at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. You can say or wave virtually hello to our pal Jerry Payne. He of Jerry Payne Audio Excellence. He, the chief cook and bottle washer when it comes to putting all of our collective pieces together each and every week in an editorial form in a fine manner. Thank you, kind sir, for helping us get through this week once again. And we also want to thank you, the listener, the fan, the enthusiast who keeps us going with your cards and letters, your proverbial cards and letters. We are ridiculously overdue in responding to all of them, but it keeps us going for sure. It's wonderful to know just how many people respond to various episodes and memories that they have. We appreciate the shout outs on social media. We appreciate you telling your friends. We appreciate your supporting the show with other links that you click and stuff that you're buying from our authors and all that kind of stuff. We just appreciate the whole hell of it. And we thank you kindly. We'll see you next week. More fun and frivolity to come. Until then, please stay safe, and we'll see you then. Bye.